She was rushing through Westfield Shopping Center like every other harried mother on a Saturday afternoon, her sneakers squeaking against the polished marble floor as she juggled grocery bags and checked her phone for the 100th time. Maya, Chen had exactly 27 minutes to grab her daughter's birthday cake, pick up the dry cleaning, and somehow make it home before the guests arrived for the party. She was nobody special in the eyes of the weekend shoppers streaming past her. Just another woman in faded jeans and an oversized cardigan, her black hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that spoke of mornings that started too early and days that never seemed to end. But what none of them knew, what couldn't be seen in her tired eyes or heard in her hurried footsteps, was that Maya carried within her hands the power to bring someone back from the edge of forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maya had been weaving through the crowd near the central fountain when she heard it, a sound that made her blood freeze and her mother's instincts override every other thought. It was the sound of pure terror, a woman's voice breaking through the ambient noise of conversation and mall music with a scream that could only mean one thing. Someone's child was in danger. She dropped her bags without hesitation, groceries, scattering across the floor as she pushed through the gathering crowd toward the source of that desperate cry. In the center of what was quickly becoming a circle of onlookers stood a young woman with platinum blonde hair, her designer dress wrinkled and stained with tears as she knelt beside a small boy who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. The child lay motionless on the cold marble, his lips already taking on a bluish tint that Maya recognized with a sinking heart. His chest wasn't moving. The woman, clearly his mother, was shaking him gently, pleading with him to wake up, her voice climbing higher with each passing second as panic consumed her completely. The crowd grew larger, but nobody moved to help. They stood there with their phones raised, some recording, others calling 911, but none of them stepping forward to do what needed to be done. Maya could see the paralysis in their faces, the fear of making things worse, of being responsible, of not knowing what to do in a situation where every second mattered more than the last. She understood that fear because she had lived with it for 3 years, had let it control her decisions and shape her into someone who preferred to remain invisible. But as she watched the little boy's mother collapse over his still form, something inside Maya shifted. The voice in her head that usually whispered warnings about getting involved, about drawing attention to herself, about the risks of helping strangers, suddenly went quiet. In its place rose a different voice, one that belonged to the person she used to be, the person she had been training to become before everything fell apart. Maya pushed through the final ring of bystanders and dropped to her knees beside the child. The mother looked up at her with eyes wild with terror and hope, searching Maya's face for some sign that this stranger might be the answer to her prayers. Maya's hands were already moving, checking for a pulse at the small wrist, tilting the boy's head back to open his airway, her muscle memory taking over from months of training that felt like a lifetime ago. His name was Oliver, she learned later. But in that moment, he was simply a child who needed her, whose life hung in the balance of the next few minutes. Maya positioned her hands over his tiny chest, her fingers finding the landmark she had practiced on countless training dummies, but never on someone so small, so fragile, so real. She began compressions, counting under her breath, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. The mother grabbed Maya's arm, her fingernails digging in as she begged for answers Maya couldn't give. All she could do was continue the rhythm. 30 compressions followed by 2 rescue breaths. The protocol burned into her memory from a certification course she had taken what felt like another lifetime ago. The crowd pressed closer, their voices creating a wall of noise that Maya forced herself to block out as she focused entirely on the small body beneath her hands. Oliver's chest was so tiny that Maya had to use just 2 fingers for compressions, adjusting her technique based on training she hadn't thought about in years. She could feel his ribs beneath her fingertips, fragile as bird bones, and she fought against the fear of causing more harm even as she knew that doing nothing would certainly mean losing him. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Each compression a prayer, each breath, she gave him a plea to whatever forces might be listening. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder as they approached the mall, but Maya knew they might not make it in time. She continued the cycle, her arms beginning to ache, sweat beading on her forehead despite the air conditioning. The mother's sobs provided a heartbreaking soundtrack to her efforts, a reminder of what was at stake beyond just one small life. This was someone's world, someone's everything, someone's reason for getting up in the morning and fighting through each day. Then, just as Maya was beginning to wonder if she was doing enough, if she was doing it right, if maybe she should let someone else take over, Oliver coughed. It was a small sound, barely audible above the crowd, but it was the most beautiful sound Maya had ever heard. She immediately turned him onto his side as he began to vomit, clearing his airway while his mother cried tears of relief and gratitude that soaked into Maya's cardigan as she pulled both of them into an embrace. The paramedics arrived moments later, their professional calm a stark contrast to the emotional chaos of the scene. They took over Oliver's care with practiced efficiency, checking his vitals, administering oxygen, preparing him for transport to the hospital. Maya stepped back, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was beginning to fade, her legs suddenly unsteady as the magnitude of what had just happened settled over her. The crowd began to disperse, their drama fix satisfied now that the crisis had passed and the professionals had taken control. Maya watched as Oliver was loaded onto a stretcher, his color already improving, his eyes fluttering open to search for his mother's face. She felt a deep satisfaction seeing him responsive, seeing the rise and fall of his chest, knowing that her hands had helped restore that precious rhythm of life. But as the ambulance pulled away, Maya realized she was alone again, anonymous in the way she preferred to be. Oliver's mother had gone with him in the ambulance, too focused on her son to exchange more than a tearful thank you with the woman who had saved his life. The mall returned to its normal Saturday afternoon bustle, shoppers stepping around the scattered remnants of Maya's groceries as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred in their midst. Maya gathered what she could salvage of her shopping, her hands still trembling slightly as she picked up items that seemed absurdly mundane after what had just transpired. A birthday cake seemed less important now. The dry cleaning could wait. Another day, and the party guests would understand if she was a few minutes late. She made her way to a bench near the fountain, needing a moment to process what had just happened and why it felt like something inside her had fundamentally shifted. 3 years ago, Maya had been 6 months away from graduating from nursing school. She had dreamed of working in pediatric emergency medicine, of being the kind of person who could make a difference in moments exactly like the one she had just lived through. Her clinical rotations had gone well, her grades were excellent, and her instructors had praised her natural instincts and gentle bedside manner. The future had seemed bright and clear, a straight path toward a career that would give her life meaning and
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
purpose. Then her father had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's, and everything changed overnight. Maya's mother worked 2 jobs just to keep their family afloat financially, and someone needed to be home to care for her father during the day. The decision to drop out of nursing school hadn't felt like a choice at all. It was simply what needed to be done, what family obligation demanded, what love required even when it meant sacrificing her own dreams. For 3 years, Maya had worked as a home health aide during the day and a grocery store cashier in the evenings, cobbling together enough income to help support her family while providing the care her father needed. Her nursing textbooks gathered dust on a shelf in her childhood bedroom, her stethoscope unused in a drawer, her dreams of wearing scrubs and saving lives feeling more distant with each passing month. She had told herself it was temporary, that once her father's condition stabilized or they found better care options, she would return to school and finish what she had started. But Alzheimer's doesn't stabilize, it only progresses, and the financial demands of his care made it impossible to consider taking time off work to return to her studies. Maya had watched her dreams slip away one day at a time, one missed opportunity after another, until it felt like someone else's life she was remembering. The CPR certification had been required for her job as a home health aide, a box to check rather than a skill she ever expected to use. She had gone through the motions during the training, practiced on the plastic mannequin with the other aides, and promptly forgotten most of what she had learned once the certificate was safely filed away with her other employment documents. It had seemed like just another bureaucratic requirement in a life that had become defined by obligation rather than passion. But today, in the moment when it mattered most, her hands had remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The muscle memory had kicked in, the training had taken over, and she had become, for just a few crucial minutes, the person she had always wanted to be. It felt like waking up from a long sleep, like remembering a song she thought she had forgotten, like finding a piece of herself she hadn't even realized was missing. Maya sat on the bench, watching families walk by with their shopping bags and their weekend plans, their children safe and healthy and blissfully unaware of how fragile life could be. She thought about Oliver, probably arriving at the hospital. Now, being examined by doctors and nurses who had chosen the path she had been forced to abandon. She wondered if they would recognize the signs of her CPR efforts, if they would know that someone with medical training had been first on the scene, if it would matter to his recovery that those crucial first minutes had been handled by someone who knew what they were doing. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had saved a child's life using skills from a career she could no longer pursue, that she had found herself in the exact situation she had dreamed of handling as a pediatric nurse, but as a bystander instead of a professional. It felt like the universe playing a cruel joke, showing her what she could have been while reminding her of what she had given up. But there was something else too, something that felt less like grief and more like hope. For the first time in 3 years, Maya felt like herself again. Not the version of herself that paid bills and changed adult diapers and rang up groceries, but the version that had dreamed of healing and helping and making a difference in the world. That version hadn't died after all. She had just been sleeping, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her daughter asking where she was, reminding her that there was a birthday party to attend in presence, to wrap in a normal Saturday afternoon life to return to. She stood up slowly, gathering her remaining shopping bags and making her way toward the mall exit, but something felt different now. Her steps were steadier, her shoulders straighter, her sense of purpose clearer than it had been in years. She drove home thinking about Oliver, wondering if he would remember anything about what had happened, if he would grow up knowing how close he had come to a different ending. She thought about his mother too, how the terror in her eyes had transformed into gratitude, how she had held Maya like she was an angel sent from heaven instead of just another shopper who happened to be in the right place at the right time. The birthday party was a success despite Maya's late arrival with a slightly dented cake. Her daughter blew out 7 candles and made a wish that she whispered into Maya's ear later, that her mommy would always be happy. Maya hugged her tight, breathing in the scent of birthday cake and bubblegum shampoo, feeling grateful for this life she had built even as she mourned the one she had given up. That night, after the guests had gone home and the dishes were washed and her daughter was safely asleep, Maya found herself digging through her old boxes in the closet, looking for something she hadn't touched in 3 years. Her nursing textbooks were exactly where she had left them, their spines unbroken, their pages still crisp with unused knowledge. She pulled out her pathophysiology book and opened it to a random page, reading about cardiac arrhythmias and feeling that familiar flutter of excitement that came from learning something new. Maybe it wasn't too late after all. Maybe there were other ways to pursue a career in healthcare, other paths that could work around her family obligations, other opportunities to use her hands and her heart to help people in their darkest moments. She had proved to herself today that the desire was still there, that the instincts were still sharp, that 3 years away from her dream hadn't killed her ability to live it. Miles away, in a corner office on the 15th floor of Metropolitan General Hospital, Dr. James Morrison was having the worst night of his professional life, though he didn't know it yet. He sat behind his mahogany desk, surrounded by financial reports and staffing schedules and budget projections that painted an increasingly grim picture of his hospital's future. As the chief executive officer of one of the city's largest medical centers, James was accustomed to difficult decisions and late-night problem-solving sessions, but tonight felt different somehow. For the past 6 months, Metropolitan General had been hemorrhaging staff at an alarming rate. Experienced nurses were leaving for better-paying positions at competing hospitals, and the recruitment efforts to replace them had been largely unsuccessful. The nursing shortage that was affecting healthcare nationwide had hit his facility particularly hard, creating a cascade of problems that kept James awake most nights wondering how to solve them. Patient satisfaction scores were declining as overworked staff struggled to provide the level of care that had once been their standard. Overtime costs were skyrocketing as the remaining nurses picked up extra shifts to cover the gaps left by their departed colleagues. Most concerning of all, there had been several near-miss incidents recently, situations where patients had almost suffered serious harm due to staffing shortages and communication breakdowns. James had tried everything he could think of to address the crisis. He had authorized significant salary increases for nursing staff, improved benefits packages, and even hired a consulting firm to assess workplace culture and recommend improvements. But the exodus continued, and each departed nurse took with them years of experience and institutional knowledge that couldn't easily be replaced. The problem went beyond simple economics, James knew. Healthcare had become an increasingly challenging field to work in, with providers facing higher patient loads, more complex cases, and growing administrative burdens that left little time for the hands-on care that had drawn many of them to medicine in the first place. Add to that the trauma and stress of working through a global pandemic, and it became clear why so many talented healthcare workers were choosing to leave the profession entirely. But understanding the problem didn't make solving it any easier. James stared at the numbers on his computer screen, trying to find some combination of policy changes and resource allocation that would stem the tide of departures and attract new talent to fill the growing gaps. He had been working 16-hour days for weeks, missing family dinners and weekend activities, all in pursuit of solutions that seemed to slip further away with each passing day. His personal life had suffered too. His ex-wife had left him 2 years ago, citing his inability to prioritize anything above his work, taking their daughter Emma with her to start a new life across the country. James saw Emma during holidays and school vacations, but their relationship felt increasingly strained as she grew older and more independent. He knew he was missing crucial years of her childhood, but the responsibility he felt toward his patients and his staff made it impossible to step back from his professional obligations. The irony wasn't lost on him that he spent his days trying to heal others while his own life fell apart piece by piece. He had become successful by traditional measures. His salary was substantial, his reputation in healthcare administration was excellent, and his hospital was generally regarded as one of the finest in the region. But success felt hollow when he had no one to share it with, when his greatest achievements came at the cost of his most important relationships. Tonight was particularly difficult because James had just received word that Dr. Sarah Chen, one of his most respected department heads, was submitting her resignation to take a position at a hospital in another state. Dr. Chen had been instrumental in developing several innovative programs at Metropolitan General, and her departure would be a significant blow to both morale and operations. More troubling still was her exit interview, in which she had cited burnout and a lack of work-life balance as her primary reasons for leaving. James knew that Dr. Chen's concerns were shared by many of his staff members, but he felt powerless to address them within the constraints of modern healthcare economics. Hospitals were businesses as much as they were healing institutions, and the financial pressures they faced were real and unforgiving. Every decision had to be weighed against its impact on the bottom line. Every policy change had to be justified in terms of return on investment. Every staff addition had to be balanced against the need to maintain competitive pricing for services. He had gone into healthcare administration because he believed he could make a difference on a larger scale than he ever could as an individual physician. Fresh out of medical school, James had seen how systemic problems created barriers to good patient care, and he had been convinced that fixing those systems would have a broader impact than treating patients one at a time. Now, 20 years later, he wondered if he had chosen the right path, if his efforts to improve healthcare delivery were actually making things better or just shifting problems around without solving them. The phone on his desk rang, interrupting his brooding thoughts with the shrill urgency that always accompanied after-hours calls to his direct line. James glanced at the clock, 11:47 p.m., and felt his stomach tighten with the familiar dread that came with late-night emergencies. In his experience, no one called hospital administrators at midnight to share good news. He picked up the receiver, expecting to hear about a staff shortage in the emergency department, an equipment malfunction in the surgical suite, or any of the dozen other crises that seemed to plague his facility with increasing frequency. Instead, he heard the voice of Dr. Patricia Williams, the chief of emergency medicine, and her tone was different from what he expected. There was something almost excited in her voice, a note of professional admiration that was rare in their typically crisis-focused conversations. Dr. Williams was calling to tell him about a patient who had just been brought in by ambulance, a 4-year-old boy who had suffered cardiac arrest at a shopping mall but had been successfully resuscitated by a bystander before paramedics arrived. The child was stable now, but what had impressed the medical team was the quality of the CPR that had been performed. According to the paramedics' report and the child's presentation upon arrival, whoever had provided the initial care had done everything exactly right. The compressions had been properly positioned and appropriately forceful for a child that size. The airway management had been textbook perfect, and the timing of the intervention had been optimal. Dr. Williams explained that it was clear the Good Samaritan had significant medical training because the level of skill demonstrated was well beyond what would be expected from a basic CPR class. The child's excellent neurological status and rapid recovery were likely due in large part to the immediate, high-quality care he had received in those crucial first minutes. James found himself intrigued despite his exhaustion. It wasn't often that Dr. Williams called just to share positive news, and there was something in her voice that suggested she was building up to a larger point. He waited as she continued, describing how the child's mother had tried desperately to find the woman who had saved her son's life, but the Good Samaritan had disappeared before anyone could get her contact information. The mother, Dr. Williams explained, was beside herself with gratitude and frustration. She wanted to thank the woman properly, to express her appreciation for the gift of her son's life, but she had no way of finding her. All she could remember was that the woman was Asian, probably in her early 30s, with kind eyes and gentle hands that had worked miracles on the mall floor. The mother had asked the hospital to help her locate the mystery hero, but patient. Privacy laws and practical limitations made that nearly impossible. As Dr. Williams spoke, James felt something stirring in his chest that he hadn't experienced in months, a sense of possibility, of potential, of something positive emerging from the constant stream of problems that defined his professional life. Here was someone with obvious medical skills and life-saving instincts who had acted selflessly to help a stranger's child. Someone who had the kind of hands-on clinical abilities that his hospital desperately needed, who had demonstrated under pressure exactly the kind of competence and compassion that made for excellent healthcare providers. James thanked Dr. Williams for the call and hung up, but his mind continued racing long after their conversation ended. Somewhere in the city was a person who had potentially saved a child's life using advanced medical skills, someone who had chosen to get involved rather than standing by and waiting for professionals to arrive. That person might be exactly what Metropolitan General needed, not just another warm body to fill a staffing gap, but someone with the clinical instincts and personal character that couldn't be taught in any training program. The problem, of course, was finding her. The mother's description was too general to be useful, and the mall's security cameras might not have captured enough detail to identify the Good Samaritan even if the hospital had legal grounds to request the footage, which it probably didn't. James understood why Dr. Williams had called him. She knew he was always looking for exceptional candidates, and this mystery woman had certainly demonstrated exceptional abilities, but she had also presented him with an impossible puzzle. Still, as James finally gathered his papers and prepared to head home for a few hours of sleep, he found himself thinking about the woman who had saved Oliver's life. Somewhere in the city, she was probably going about her normal routine, unaware that her actions had rippled outward in ways she couldn't imagine. Not only had she given a family their son back, but she had also given a struggling hospital administrator something he had been lacking for months. Hope that there were still people out there who embodied the best of what healthcare could be. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching Maya's mood as she went through her usual Sunday routine. Her father had had a difficult night, confused and agitated, requiring constant supervision that left Maya exhausted by the time her mother took over in the morning. The contrast between yesterday's moment of purpose and today's grinding reality felt particularly sharp, like waking from a beautiful dream to find yourself back in the same unchanged circumstances. Maya's daughter chattered happily over breakfast about her birthday party, recounting every detail with the enthusiasm that only 7-year-olds could muster. Maya smiled and made appropriate responses, but part of her mind kept drifting back to the mall, to Oliver's still form on the marble floor, to the feeling of his heartbeat returning under her hands. She wondered how he was doing, if he had gone home from the hospital yet, if his mother was holding him a little tighter this morning. After breakfast, Maya settled her father in front of the television with his favorite Sunday morning program and tried to lose herself in household chores. But even folding laundry and washing dishes couldn't quiet the restlessness that had taken root in her chest. Something had awakened in her yesterday, something that refused to go back to sleep now that it had been stirred to life. She found herself at her computer, almost without conscious decision, typing nursing school into the search engine and scrolling through program options in her area. Most required full-time attendance, which was impossible given her current obligations, but there were a few that offered evening classes or online components that might make it feasible to return to her studies. The tuition costs made her stomach drop, but financial aid might be available, and there were always student loans if necessary. Maya closed the browser window before she could get too carried away with possibilities that might not be realistic. She had responsibilities, people who depended on her, obligations that couldn't be wished away no matter how much she might want to pursue her dreams. Her father needed care, her mother needed support, her daughter needed stability, and the income from her 2 jobs was barely enough to keep their heads above water as it was. But the seed had been planted, and Maya found it impossible to ignore completely. Throughout the day, as she helped her father with his medications and prepared dinner for the week ahead, she kept returning to the idea that maybe there was a way forward. Maybe the path to her dreams wasn't permanently blocked after all. The woman who had saved Oliver's life wasn't the same person who had dropped out of nursing school 3 years ago. She was stronger, more experienced, more certain of what she wanted and why she wanted it. Meanwhile, across the city, James Morrison was having his own moment of reflection. He had arrived at the hospital early, as was his custom, but instead of diving immediately into his usual routine of meetings and administrative tasks, he found himself walking through the pediatric ward where Oliver had spent the night. The boy was doing well, according to the nursing staff, alert and playful and showing no signs of neurological damage from his brief cardiac arrest. James paused outside Oliver's room, watching through the window as the child's mother read him a story, her voice animated and her expressions exaggerated in the way that parents instinctively knew would capture their children's attention. The love between them was palpable, the bond that had been threatened yesterday now safely restored. James thought about his own daughter, Emma, and felt the familiar pang of regret that came with realizing how much of her childhood he had missed in pursuit of professional success. He knocked softly on the door frame and introduced himself to Oliver's mother, whose name was Amanda Richardson. She was a single parent, James learned, working as a marketing coordinator for a small advertising agency while raising her son on her own. Yesterday had been their special Saturday outing, a tradition they had maintained since Oliver was old enough to enjoy trips to the mall, but it had nearly turned into the worst day of her life. Amanda's gratitude was overwhelming as she recounted the events at the mall, her words tumbling over each other as she tried to express how much the mystery woman's actions had meant to her. She described Maya's calm competence, her gentle manner with Oliver, the way she had taken control of a chaotic situation and turned it toward healing. Amanda had tried everything she could think of to find the woman who had saved her son's life, but her efforts had been unsuccessful. James listened to Amanda's story with growing fascination, not just because of the medical aspects, but because of what it revealed about the kind of person Maya must be. According to Amanda, the mystery woman had never seemed to hesitate, never appeared to doubt her actions, never sought recognition or credit for what she had done. She had simply seen a child in need and responded with skill and compassion, then faded back into anonymity as quietly as she had emerged. That kind of selfless competence was exactly what James's hospital needed, but it was also increasingly rare in a healthcare environment that often rewarded self-promotion and political maneuvering over clinical excellence. The mystery woman represented something that couldn't be quantified in budget reports or measured by efficiency metrics. She represented the heart of medicine, the reason why healthcare existed in the first place. James promised Amanda that he would put out word through the hospital's network, reaching out to other medical facilities and training programs to see if anyone knew of a woman matching Maya's description who had recent CPR training and obvious medical skills. It was a long shot, but sometimes long shots paid off in unexpected ways. At the very least, it would give Amanda some sense that efforts were being made to find the woman who had given her back her son. As James made his rounds through the hospital that morning, he found himself looking at his staff with new eyes, wondering how many of them had stories of their own about moments when they had made a crucial difference in someone's life. The nurses hurrying between patient rooms, the technicians running diagnostic tests, the support staff keeping everything running smoothly. They all had chosen careers dedicated to helping others, but the daily pressures of their work often obscured the nobility of that choice. The nursing shortage that kept James awake at night wasn't just about numbers and budgets. It was about losing people who had the same instincts and dedication that the mystery woman had demonstrated. Every nurse who left took with them not just their clinical skills, but their capacity for compassion, their willingness to act in moments of crisis, their commitment to healing that went beyond what any job description could capture. James spent the afternoon in meetings with department heads, discussing staffing issues and patient care metrics, but part of his attention remained focused on the puzzle of finding Maya. He authorized his human resources director to reach out to local training programs and healthcare facilities, circulating a description of the incident and asking if anyone knew of a woman with Maya's apparent qualifications who might have been at the mall yesterday. It was a needle in a haystack search, but James had learned over the years that persistence often succeeded where more sophisticated approaches failed. Sometimes the best solutions came from unexpected directions, from connections that seemed impossible until they suddenly weren't. If the mystery woman was meant to be found, if she was supposed to become part of Metropolitan General's mission to heal and serve, then perhaps the universe would find a way to bring her into their orbit. The days that followed fell into a familiar pattern for Maya, but with an undercurrent of restlessness that made everything feel different. She continued her work as a home health aide and grocery store cashier, caring for her father and daughter with the same dedication she had always shown. But the memory of saving Oliver's life kept surfacing at unexpected moments. She would be helping her father with his physical therapy exercises and suddenly remember the feeling of performing CPR compressions, She would be scanning groceries at work and find herself thinking about cardiac rhythms and emergency protocols. Maya's mother noticed the change in her demeanor, the way she seemed more present and engaged despite the demanding schedule that hadn't lessened at all. When Maya mentioned that she had been looking into nursing programs again, her mother's response was more supportive than Maya had expected. Perhaps, her mother suggested, it was time to consider how their family's needs might be met in new ways, how Maya's dreams might be pursued alongside rather than instead of her current responsibilities. The conversation opened possibilities that Maya hadn't allowed herself to consider seriously. Her mother was willing to take on more of her father's daily care, and Maya's brother, who lived 2 hours away, had been talking about moving closer to help with the family situation. With some creative scheduling and careful financial planning, it might be possible for Maya to attend evening nursing classes while maintaining at least one of her current jobs. Maya found herself researching programs with renewed intensity, comparing curricula and schedules, calculating costs and financial aid possibilities. The path wouldn't be easy. It would mean 3 more years of exhausting schedules, mounting student debt, and constant juggling of competing priorities. But it would also mean moving toward the life she had always wanted, the career that would let her use her hands and heart to heal others. She applied to 3 programs, telling herself that she was just exploring options, not making any final decisions. But when the applications were complete and submitted, Maya felt a sense of forward motion that had been missing from her life. For 3 years, whether or not she was accepted, whether or not the logistics worked out, she had taken the first step toward reclaiming the dreams she had set aside. James, meanwhile, had enlisted the help of his entire leadership team in the search for Maya. He had reached out to nursing schools, medical training programs, healthcare facilities throughout the region, circulating Amanda's description of the mystery woman and asking if anyone could provide additional information. The response had been enthusiastic. Apparently, stories of heroic strangers saving lives still captured people's imagination, but so far, no concrete leads had emerged. The search had taken on a life of its own within the hospital, with staff members sharing the story and adding their own theories about who the mystery woman might be and where she might be found. Some suggested posting on social media, others recommended reaching out to local news stations, and a few proposed putting up flyers in the mall where the incident had occurred. James appreciated their enthusiasm, but he was wary of turning Maya into a media sensation when she had clearly chosen to remain anonymous. 3 weeks after Oliver's rescue, James was beginning to accept that they might never find the woman who had saved the boy's life. He had done everything he could think of within the bounds of privacy laws and professional ethics. But the city was large and Maya's anonymity seemed to be complete. Perhaps it was enough that she had saved a child and made a difference, even if she would never know how much her actions had meant to the people whose lives she had touched. Then, on a Thursday morning that started like any other, James received a phone call that changed everything. The caller was Dr. Elizabeth Santos, the admissions director for the accelerated nursing program at City Community College, and she had interesting news about one of their recent applicants. The woman had listed previous nursing school coursework and current employment as a home health aide, but what had caught Dr. Santos's attention was the personal essay portion of the application. The applicant had written about a recent experience that had reminded her why she wanted to become a nurse, describing how she had performed CPR on a child at a shopping mall and realized that she needed to find a way back to the career she had always felt called to pursue. The essay was compelling and well-written, but more importantly, it matched the description of the incident that James had been circulating throughout the healthcare community. Dr. Santos had remembered receiving James's inquiry about the mystery woman because it had been such an unusual request, and when she read the essay, she immediately thought there might be a connection. She couldn't share the applicant's personal information due to privacy regulations, but she could confirm that there was indeed a candidate in their program who claimed to have performed the life-saving CPR at the mall. James felt his pulse quicken as Dr. Santos described what she could share about the applicant. Asian woman in her early 30s, previous nursing school experience, currently working in healthcare support roles, passionate about pediatric care. It all matched Amanda's description of the mystery woman perfectly. The challenge now was figuring out how to make contact without violating the applicant's privacy or creating an uncomfortable situation for everyone involved. Dr. Santos suggested a solution that was both ethical and elegant. She could reach out to the applicant directly, explain that the hospital had been looking for the woman who had saved Oliver's life, and ask if she would be willing to speak with James about potential opportunities at Metropolitan General. If the applicant was indeed Maya, and if she was interested in learning more about the hospital, she could choose to make contact herself. James agreed immediately to this approach, providing Dr. Santos with his direct contact information and asking her to convey his sincere appreciation for what the mystery woman had done. He also asked her to mention that Metropolitan General was always interested in connecting with healthcare professionals who demonstrated exceptional clinical skills and personal character, regardless of their current employment status or educational background. That afternoon, Maya was in the middle of helping an elderly client with her medication routine when her phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unfamiliar number. She didn't recognize the name Dr. Elizabeth Santos, but something about the urgency conveyed in the message made her call back as soon as she had a private moment. The conversation that followed left Maya stunned and slightly overwhelmed. Dr. Santos explained about James's search for the woman who had saved Oliver's life, about the hospital's interest in connecting with healthcare professionals who embodied the best of medical practice, about opportunities that might be available for someone with Maya's apparent qualifications and character. Maya confirmed that she was indeed the person who had performed CPR on Oliver, but she struggled to understand why that would be of interest to a major hospital CEO. Dr. Santos gently explained that exceptional healthcare professionals were rare, and James Morrison wanted to discuss potential opportunities that might align with Maya's obvious talents and career aspirations. The phone call ended with Maya agreeing to meet with James the following week, though she spent the rest of the day wondering what kind of opportunities could possibly be available to someone who hadn't even finished nursing school. She had saved one child's life, but that hardly qualified her for anything beyond what she was already doing. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.